New Guinea, 1943, jungle where humidity kills metal faster than Japanese bullets. An American Marine, whose name history has not preserved, stands knee-deep in mud and looks at his Thompson M 1928 A1, the legendary submachine gun symbol of Chicago and Hollywood, a weapon that cost $200 apiece, equivalent to 2 months' wages, beautiful, gleaming, perfectly machined, and absolutely dead. The bolt jammed somewhere around the third magazine, tight tolerances, jeweler-quality steel finishing, all of it turned into a problem when tropical mud got inside the mechanism. Next to him stands an Australian from the 7th Division, and in his hands is something resembling a water pipe with a magazine sticking up like a chimney. Owen marked the first, a weapon that looks like it was assembled in a garage over the weekend, and it keeps firing, hour after hour, day after day. The American looks at the Australian. The Australian smirks. A week later, this Marine will try to trade the Owen for everything he has. Watch, cigarettes, even rations. The Australian will refuse, because he knows the secret. In jungle hell, beauty doesn't win. Reliability does. This is the story of a weapon that should never have existed. That was mocked by British experts, sabotaged by Australian bureaucrats, and ignored by American generals. But that became the only submachine gun to go through the entire Pacific War without a single major design modification. The only automatic weapon that U.S. Marines tried to steal from their allies, the only gun that proved, sometimes, ugly truth beats beautiful lies. Early 1939, Melbourne. Evelyn Owen, a 24-year-old kid without engineering education, without experience in weapons design, without connections in military circles, just a guy who liked tinkering with metal in his father's shed. He saw a problem that professionals ignored. All existing submachine guns fed from below or from the side. The magazine stuck down like the Thompson, or sideways like the Sten, seemed logical. Gravity helps. But Owen thought differently. What if a soldier is lying in mud? What if he needs to shoot from a trench filled with water? The bottom magazine will stick into the ground. The side one will upset the balance. His solution was simple to the point of genius. Magazine on top. Let gravity work not against, but for. Let the cartridges fall into the receiver under their own weight. No springs, no complex mechanisms. Pure physics. But the world of 1939 didn't need the genius of an Australian autodidact. The British Empire supplied Australia with the best examples. Thompson from the Americans, Sten from the British themselves. Why some colonial homemade contraption? Owen took the blueprints to the Department of Munitions. Rejection, too strange, too ugly, too Australian. He tried to show the prototype to army officers. Mockery. Kid, go home, do something useful. One colonel called his creation a drain pipe with a trigger. Owen left, but didn't give up. He hid the prototype under the house and enlisted as a volunteer in the army. As a private, if weapons designers won't listen, maybe soldiers will understand. But history was preparing a surprise. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. The Japanese fleet dominates the Pacific. Singapore, which was considered impregnable, will fall in 2 months. Australia suddenly realizes, we're next. The British fleet won't come. It's tied up in the Atlantic. The Americans haven't recovered from the blow yet. The Australian continent is defenseless. And then someone remembered the strange kid with the drain pipe. They found Owen in the barracks. Retrieved the prototype from under the house, organized tests, not ceremonial ones like in peacetime, real, brutal ones. Oh, let's take Thompson, Sten, and this Australian thing, and give them hell. Port Melbourne, military proving ground. February 1942, a commission of skeptical British experts and Australian officers, 3 submachine guns, 1 task, fire until they break. First test, mud, weapons are immersed in liquid clay, pulled out, fired. Thompson passes 2 magazines, bolt jams. Tolerance is too tight, dirt clogs the mechanism. Sten does better. The British learned from Dunkirk experience, made looser tolerances, 4 magazines. Then failure. Owen fires and keeps firing. 10 magazines, 20. The barrel is red hot. Smoke comes from the receiver, but the mechanism works. Why? Because the top magazine isn't just eccentricity. It's a self-cleaning system. Dirt can't accumulate in the receiver. It simply falls out below under its own weight. Gravity, which hindered everyone else, here became an ally. Second test. Sand. North Africa showed that desert dust kills weapons no worse than mud. Submachine guns are covered with fine sand, shaken, fired. Thompson surrenders first. Sand penetrates the drum magazine, clogs the trigger mechanism. Sten holds out longer, but eventually sand grains block the return spring. Owen continues to work. The commission is shocked. One of the British experts, Lieutenant Colonel Williams, writes in the report, "This specimen demonstrates a level of reliability incompatible with its primitive appearance. Immediate production recommended." Primitive appearance. That's the most generous assessment. In reality, Owen looked like an insult to aesthetics. Thick cylindrical receiver, magazine sticking up and blocking the sight line, stock from cheap wood, welding seams rough, visible, no shine, no polish. A weapon you'd be ashamed to show at a parade, but not ashamed to take into battle. Production started in March 1942 at the Lysot's plant in Port Kembla, a factory that previously made corrugated iron for roofs. Now, submachine guns. No CNC machines, no precision mills, ordinary lathes, stamping presses, welding equipment. Workers who a month ago were bending sheet metal now assembled combat weapons. And this wasn't a bug, but a feature, because Owen was designed precisely for such production. It could be made at any factory with basic equipment. Receiver, stamped steel cylinder, bolt, simple piece of steel, turned on a lathe. Return spring, standard industrial, like in car suspension. Trigger mechanism, 7 parts versus 23 in the Thompson. Magazine, bent sheet metal, didn't even require complex stamping. Cost, 30 Australian pounds apiece. For comparison, Thompson cost 70 pounds, if counted in Australian currency. Sten, 25, but its reliability in the tropics remained questionable. Owen was the golden mean, cheaper than American, more reliable than British. By June 1942, the factory was producing 1,000 submachine guns per week. By year's end, 5,000. In total, 45,000 units were produced during the war. Not millions like Sten or PPS, but enough to arm every Australian infantryman who fought in the jungles and create a legend. But what made Owen so special from an engineering standpoint? Let's start with the very top magazine, the weapon's calling card, and curse simultaneously. The magazine for 33 9mm parabellum cartridges stuck up at an angle of approximately 45 degrees. This created a problem: how to aim if the magazine blocks the view. Owen solved this radically, shifted the sight line to the left. Yes, the soldier aimed not along the weapon's center, but from the side. Sounds crazy. Worked perfectly, because in the jungle no one conducts aimed fire at 300 meters. Combat happens at 30, at 20, sometimes at 10 meters. And in such conditions, what matters is not sniper accuracy, but the ability to quickly point the weapon toward the target and deliver a burst. And Owen did this magnificently. The weapon's balance was intuitive. The magazine on top gave a center of gravity right above the pistol grip. The submachine gun didn't nosedive like the Thompson with its heavy barrel, didn't twist like the Sten with its side magazine. It simply lay in the hands and shot where the soldier looked. The bolt, that's a separate story. A massive piece of steel weighing almost half a kilogram. Engineers from London called it excessive. They say it could have been made lighter, faster, more elegant. They didn't understand the main thing. This bolt wasn't a bug, but protection against soldier stupidity. A heavy bolt meant low rate of fire, about 700 rounds per minute versus 1,000 for the Thompson. Sounds like a disadvantage? In theory, yes. In practice, soldiers blessed this, because low rate meant controlled fire, meant the submachine gun wouldn't devour the entire magazine in 2 seconds, meant that even an unblooded recruit could deliver a short burst of 3 to 4 rounds rather than send all 30 into the sky from recoil. Besides, the heavy bolt worked as a damper. It absorbed recoil energy, made firing softer. Owen didn't hit the shoulder like Thompson. It pushed like a disgruntled child, noticeably but tolerably. Barrel length of 25 centimeters, a compromise between compactness and ballistics. Shorter than the Thompson with its 28 centimeters, but longer than the Sten with 20. enough for powder gases to completely burn, giving the bullet maximum velocity. Not enough for the weapon to become unwieldy in jungles where every extra centimeter catches on vines. Rifling in the barrel. Classic right-hand twists, pitch 1 turn per 25 centimeters. Nothing revolutionary, just time-tested geometry. Chrome plating? Forget it. The Owen barrel was ordinary steel covered with bluing. In European conditions, this would mean corrosion in a month. In Australia, they learned to care for weapons. Soldiers were issued oil and rags, forced to clean the barrel every evening. Not high technology, but discipline, and it worked. Trigger mechanism, a masterpiece of primitivism. Only 7 parts. Trigger, sear, firing spring, safety, and 3 pins. That's all. No cunning levers, no intermediate links. The soldier pressed the trigger and the sear released the bolt. The bolt went forward, chambered around, and struck the primer. Shot. Recoil threw the bolt back. It cocked the sear again. The cycle repeated as long as the soldier kept his finger on the trigger or until the cartridges ran out. Ultimate simplicity meant ultimate reliability. There was simply nothing to break. Even if the spring weakened from time, and such things happened after 10,000 shots, it could be replaced in 5 minutes with an ordinary screwdriver, without an armorer, without machines, right in the trench. The safety was located above the pistol grip, a lever that the thumb moved from fire to safe position, elementary. But even here, Owen showed character. In the safe position, the bolt was mechanically blocked, not just the trigger disconnected. No, the bolt physically couldn't move from its place. This saved the lives of dozens of soldiers who fell in mud, hit stocks against rocks, dropped weapons from cliffs. Thompson in such situations could deliver an involuntary burst. Its safety only blocked the trigger, but not the bolt. Owen was silent, dead silence, until the soldier himself decided to shoot. The magazine, another engineering find hidden behind an ugly exterior. Box-shaped for 33 rounds, it looked bulky, but the cartridges in it were arranged in 2 rows, which then converged into one before feeding into the receiver. A classic double-stack magazine scheme, but with a trick. The feed spring was reinforced, designed to work in any magazine position. A soldier could hold Owen upside down. Cartridges would still feed. Could lie on his side, no problem. Could shoot from behind his back without looking, and the submachine gun worked. Why? Because gravity helped, not hindered. Cartridges fell down, the spring pushed them to the bolt, and no perverted shooting positions could disrupt this process. Stock and fore end were made from Australian ash, cheap but strong wood, no exotics, no walnut or beech like European models, just local timber harvested in Victoria forests. Minimal processing, cut, sanded, soaked in linseed oil for moisture protection, came out rough but reliable, and most importantly, the Owen stock was removable. 2 screws, half a minute of work, and the submachine gun turned into a weapon only 45 centimeters long. Perfect for fighting in bunkers, for paratroopers, for tankers. Thompson required a special version without a stock. Owen was universal. Weight of fully loaded weapon, 4 kilograms, 200 grams, heavier than Sten by half a kilo, lighter than Thompson by a kilogram. Golden mean, a soldier could carry it all day without fatigue, but the weapon was massive enough to dampen recoil. Length with stock, 70 centimeters, shorter than Lee Enfield infantry rifle by 30 centimeters, but longer than most submachine guns. Again, compromise. Compact enough for jungles, long enough for effective shooting. Effective range, 150 meters. Sounds modest against rifles with their 600 meters, but in the jungle, visibility rarely exceeded 50 meters. In urban combat, 30. Owen was created for close combat, and at these distances it rained. Rate of fire of 700 rounds per minute meant that in 5 seconds of holding the trigger, a soldier fired approximately 60 bullets. This is a wall of lead that turned any enemy cover into a sieve. This is psychological pressure that broke even hardened Japanese soldiers. 9mm parabellum caliber. Not an Australian choice, but a forced compromise. The British insisted on compatibility with American ammunition supplied through Lend-Lease. Owen wanted to use British .380 ACP, a weaker cartridge, but the military outshot the designer and turned out to be right. 9mm gave sufficient stopping power to drop an opponent with one hit to the torso. The British cartridge required 2 to 3 hits. In jungles where visibility is instantaneous and the enemy can disappear into bushes in a second, the first hit must be the last. Barrel life, 15,000 rounds before critical wear. After that, accuracy dropped, but the weapon continued to fire. Cases were documented where Owen went through 30,000 rounds before being decommissioned. For comparison, Thompson required barrel replacement after 10,000, Sten after 8,000. Why did Owen live longer? Again, low rate of fire. The barrel heated less. Chrome burned out slower. Rifling lasted longer. Lubrication any, gun oil, motor oil, grease, even lard. Soldiers in the jungle lubricated Owen with whatever they had, and it worked because tolerances were so loose that the type of lubrication didn't matter. Main thing, at least something between metal surfaces. Thompson required special gun oil. Motor oil was too thick for its precise mechanisms. Sten could work without lubrication at all, but wore out quickly. Owen was unpretentious, like a farm tractor. Pour in oil and go. Sound of the shot? Characteristic sharp bark, different from the dull thud of Thompson or the piercing crack of Sten. Soldiers recognized Owen by sound at 300 meters. The Japanese learned too, and feared this sound because it meant Australians nearby. And Australians don't take prisoners after what the Japanese did to the wounded. Owen received its first baptism of fire in September 1942 on the Kokoda Track, Papua New Guinea. Mountain jungle where it rains 300 days a year, where humidity is 100% and temperature under 40 degrees Celsius, where rifles rust overnight and boots rot on feet in a week. The Australian 7th Division held the passes against the advance of the Japanese 18th Army, force ratio 3-1 in favor of the enemy, supply only by air, drops from planes once every 3 days, ammunition worth its weight in gold, every cartridge counts. Private Jack McDonnell from the 21st Battalion received Owen among the first. Before that, he fought with Lee Enfield, a bolt-action rifle, reliable but slow. 10 rounds in the magazine, reload after each shot. In dense jungle where the Japanese attacked from 20 meters, the rifle was almost useless. McDonnell recalled later, "I saw Owen and thought, what an ugly monster. Magazine sticks out like a chimney on a roof. Wood of the stock polished so that there are more splinters than varnish. But they gave the command to shoot for zeroing. And I fell in love. The submachine gun fit in my hands like family. Shots went softly. Recoil didn't knock off aim. I could give a short burst of 3 rounds, and all 3 landed in a circle the size of a plate at 50 meters. September 26th, the Japanese began a night attack on Australian positions near Yoribaiva village. Banzai tactics, massive assault wave with screams designed to break the enemy's morale, worked against the Chinese, worked against the Malays, didn't work against Australians. McDonnell stood in a trench filled with water to the waist, Owen in his hands. The Japanese came through the jungle, silhouettes in the dark. 50 meters, 30, 20, command to open fire. McDonnell pressed the trigger, burst. Another one and another. Magazine emptied in 8 seconds. Reload, pulled out empty magazine, inserted new one. 4 seconds, including searching for a new magazine in the dark. Continued firing. In 10 minutes of combat, McDonnell fired 150 rounds, 5 magazines. The barrel smoked, smelled of burning and oil, but Owen worked. Not a single delay, not a single failure. In the morning, they counted the results. In front of McDonnell's trench lay 11 Japanese bodies. Not all from his bursts. Neighbors were shooting too. But Owen made a contribution, and most importantly, the weapon survived the night in water. McDonnell pulled it from the trench, shook off mud, and continued using it without cleaning, without lubrication, without maintenance, just picked it up and went on. The Americans learned about Owen by accident. November 1942, Guadalcanal. Joint operation of Australian and American forces against the Japanese beachhead. U.S. Marines were armed with Thompson and Rising, another American submachine gun that failed all reliability tests. rising broke so often that Marines preferred M1 Garand rifles. Thompson was better but suffered from dirt and sand of coral beaches. Captain Robert Leckie, a Marine whose memoirs later formed the basis of the series, quote, 2 described meeting Australians. Quote, 3. Marines began asking, then demanding, then trying to steal Owen from Australians, without success. Australian command banned transfer of weapons to allies. Production barely covered their own needs, but several dozen Owens still passed to Americans through barter. One submachine gun was exchanged for 3 cartons of Camel cigarettes, a bottle of whiskey, and chocolate rations. Astronomical price at the front. Australians agreed only because they knew they'd get new Owens and Marines would stay with Thompsons. Leckie later wrote, "If I were offered to choose any weapon for jungle warfare, I would take Owen, not Thompson with his gangster romance, not Barr with his firepower, precisely Owen, because in the jungle, the one who shoots always wins, not the one who shoots beautifully." But there were critics, too. British officers who arrived in Australia as advisors winced at the sight of Owen. One major from the Royal Engineers called it an insult to British weapons tradition. Like, where's the elegance of Sten? Where's technical perfection? Australians offered him to take Owen and spend a day in the jungle. The major refused, principles more important than practice, until his own Sten jammed during a sudden encounter with a Japanese patrol. An Australian sergeant saved his life by shooting 2 Japanese with Owen. The major no longer criticized the weapon, but didn't apologize either. Lizot's production capacity worked at the limit. By 1943, the factory produced 2,000 submachine guns per month. It wasn't enough. The Army demanded more. The Navy demanded for boarding teams. The Air Force demanded for a bomber cruise. They tried to expand production at other factories, didn't work. It turned out that even such a primitive weapon requires certain assembly skills. Lizot's workers had practiced, knew every trick, every nuance. New factories produced defects, submachine guns with skewed bolts, incorrectly installed springs, magazines that didn't hold cartridges, had to concentrate production at one enterprise and accept limited output. A modification appeared. Owen Mark II. Changes minimal. Strengthened magazine feed spring, slightly changed stock design to speed up production, added ability to mount bayonet knife. The latter was a concession to traditionalists who believed any weapon should have a bayonet. In practice, bayonet on Owen was rarely used. In close combat, a submachine gun burst was more effective than cold steel. But the presence of bayonet mount calmed generals. The war went on. New Britain, 1943. Australians stormed Japanese fortifications in Rabaul. Concrete pillboxes camouflaged in jungle, machine guns and embrasures. Owen becomes the ideal weapon for assault groups. A soldier can approach the embrasure, stick the barrel inside, and give a long burst, 40 rounds in an enclosed space, guaranteed destruction of everyone inside. Thompson did the same, but was heavier and less convenient in narrow approaches. Steen was lighter, but soldiers didn't trust it after several cases of accidental discharges. Borneo, 1945. Last months of war. Australian 9th Division conducts cleanup of Japanese garrisons. Enemy fanatical, but already without supply, without reinforcements, without hope. They fight to the last cartridge, to the last man. Owen works like clockwork. Soldiers learn to use it in all conceivable conditions, in swamps where water's chest deep, in trees, during ambushes from upper branches, in caves where echo from shots is deafening. The submachine gun endured everything. By the end of the war, some Owens passed through the hands of 5 to 6 owners. First soldier died, weapon passed to second, second wounded to third, and so on. Submachine guns became talismans, legends. One Owen had 13 marks scratched on the stock by number of owners. 13 soldiers used this weapon, 12 died or were wounded. The 13th survived until the end of the war. He kept the submachine gun contrary to the order to surrender weapons, hid at home in the attic. Police found it only in the 70s when the old soldier passed away and heirs sorted through property. By that time, Owen was already a museum rarity. August 15th, 1945, Japan capitulated. War ended, and the story of betrayal began because the Australian government decided Owen is no longer needed. Why homemade weapon when you can buy British Sten or American M3 grease gun? Production was curtailed in September. A month later, Lysot's factory returned to producing corrugated iron. Machines that made bolts and barrels were retooled for peacetime needs. Spare parts stopped being produced. Already existing Owens began to be decommissioned and scrapped. The Army resisted. Veterans who fought with Owen wrote letters, submitted petitions. They said, "This is the best weapon we had." Why abandon it? The answer was cynical: politics. Australia depended on British and American supplies of military equipment. Tanks, aircraft, artillery, everything came from abroad. If Australia continues to produce its own small arms, it will offend allies. Offended allies might reduce supplies. Therefore, Owen was sacrificed to diplomacy. But the Army didn't surrender completely. Several thousand submachine guns were left in warehouses as strategic reserve. And when the Korean War began in 1950, Owen returned. Australian battalions sent to help UN was armed with old submachine guns. They showed themselves magnificently again. Korean winter, minus 30 degrees Celsius. American M3s froze, lubricant thickened, bolts failed. Owen worked because it could be lubricated with lard or even diesel fuel. Summer, plus 40, dust and dirt. M3 jammed. Owen continued to shoot. Australians in Korea became objects of Allied envy. Again, American soldiers again tried to trade for Owen, again unsuccessfully. Vietnam, 60s, last war where Owen fought officially. Australian contingent received new submachine guns, Belgian FNFAL and American M16, modern, plastic, high-tech, and capricious. M16 in first versions was famous for failures in jungle conditions. FNFAL was reliable but heavy for patrols. Soldiers retrieved old Owens from warehouses unofficially, took them on patrols as backup weapons, and when M16 failed at the most inopportune moment, Owen saved lives again. By the 70s, Owen was finally decommissioned. Last specimens were sent to museums or melted for scrap metal. Exact number of surviving submachine guns unknown. Estimates vary from 500 to 2,000 units, most in private collections. Price on antique market from $10,000 to $30,000 for a working specimen. For comparison, Thompson from the same period costs $5,000 to $7,000. Owen is more expensive because rarer, because unique, because it's not just a weapon, it's a symbol. Why didn't Owen become world famous? Why doesn't his name thunder like Thompson, MP40, or PP-Ashich? The answer is simple: politics and marketing. Thompson had Hollywood, gangster films, war blockbusters. MP40 had Nazi mythology, enemy weapon recognized by all. PP had Stalingrad and Soviet propaganda. Owen only had trenches of New Guinea and swamps of Borneo, places the world preferred to forget after the war. Australia didn't promote its submachine gun for export. Why, if production was already curtailed, didn't make films, didn't print posters, didn't create a cult? Owen remained a weapon for those who fought, and for those who know the truth. Evelyn Owen, creator of the submachine gun, didn't get rich from his invention. The government paid him £10,000, a one-time bonus for the patent. This is equivalent to approximately $300,000 in today's money. Sounds solid, but for a weapon produced in quantity of 45,000 units, and that saved thousands of lives, it's pennies. For comparison, John Browning earned millions on his designs, receiving royalties on each unit sold. Owen received a fixed sum and nothing more. He returned to civilian life, worked as an engineer at a factory, passed away in 1949 from a heart attack. He was 33 years old. His name was almost forgotten, until veterans began telling stories. Today, Owen is a cult weapon among collectors and historians. Not mass, not popular, but respected. This is a submachine gun that proved engineering perfection doesn't always correlate with aesthetics, that an ugly weapon can be lethal, that a garage autodidact can outpace corporations with century-long experience, that Australia, a country at the edge of the world, can create something the whole world will envy. In 1995, the Royal Australian Regiment conducted a survey among veterans of all post-war conflicts. What weapon did you consider the best? 73% named Owen, not modern rifles, not machine guns, not grenade launchers, the ugly submachine gun with magazine on top, because it worked, because it saved, because it was Australian, stubborn, reliable, unbending. The story of Owen is a story about how war doesn't forgive weakness, but rewards reliability. It's a story about how beauty is not a criterion of effectiveness. It's a story about how sometimes genius is born not in design bureaus, but in a father's shed, and that the ugliest weapon can be the most beloved. Because when your life hangs by a thread, you don't care about polished steel and elegant lines. You need a weapon that will shoot today, tomorrow, in a month, in mud, in sand, in water, in smoke, that won't let you down when everything else fails. Owen was exactly that. Ugly, crude, cheap, and absolutely irreplaceable. The only submachine gun that American Marines tried to steal from Allies. The only weapon Australians loved more than any other. Not because it was the best in all parameters, but because it was theirs. And it worked. Always.